Welcome to Happy Hour Live, episode 10. I'm Eddie Meneses. Today is Friday, May 22nd. It has been a crazy week. I know a lot of these interviews I've been doing has been around the mentality of practicing, planning it, not killing yourself in the practice room, not playing till your fingers bleed. But then sometimes there are those weeks where you just have to cram and you have to lock yourself in a practice room. And that has been my week this week. It has been an insane week. A week ago, my friend Matt Howard, who is principal percussionist in the LA Phil, asked me to play a duet with him for the LA Phil's new music series. It's a festival they do every year called Noon to Midnight. It's at Disney Hall, although this year it's going to be all online. It is a new music festival going from noon to midnight. And he asked me to play a duet with him, and I'm so honored by that. And of course I said yes, but he wanted me to learn this piece and he wanted me to memorize it. And so it has been a crazy week. It's a piece by Steve Reich called Nagoya Marimbas. Any of you who aren't familiar with his music, he's a minimalist composer. And what that means is you play like a certain pattern a bunch of times, and then you go on to a new pattern and play that a bunch of times, and you keep going to the end. But with his music, you play a pattern, and then the next pattern is just like a slight little variation. He might change a rhythm just slightly, or he might just offset you by an eighth note or change one note. So it was so hard to keep track of where you are in these pieces, and it is mentally just so challenging. So I have just locked myself in practice room all week and been practicing, but ultimately it's super rewarding. I'm really looking forward to the finished product. It's going to be awesome. I'll let you know in a future episode when that comes out. I don't exactly know when the festival is, but it'll be out soon, and I'm really stoked about it to be doing a duet with my good friend, Matt Howard. Speaking of Matt used to be the co-host of this show. Like, first two episodes, that was the original concept, was me and Matt Howard co-hosting a show, but now I'm the sole host of the show, and it's really taken on a more serious and informative tone, and so I'm thinking about changing the name from Happy Hour Live to something. I haven't thought about it yet. I would love your opinion. If anyone has an opinion on a name, or if you like the name, or if you think the name doesn't matter, or if you have an idea for a new name, put it in the comments below or send me a direct message. Would love to hear your input about it. Originally, the concept of the show was me and Matt drinking whiskey, talking about what we were drinking, and having another percussionist on, and we would just kind of talk about life for an hour. It was basically a live hang, and it was an Ask Me Anything type format. It was heavily dependent on audience participation, asking us questions. Otherwise, we were just going to hang out. And clearly, the show is completely different from that. You know, it is during happy hour on a Friday on the West Coast, but that is where the comparisons end. So I'd appreciate any input anyone has for a new name for the show, or let me know if you like the name, and I'll keep it. Speaking of the show, please like, comment, and share. The best thing you can do to help me out is to just take a couple seconds and hit that share button and put it on your profile. It has been amazing to see the show kind of grow organically. I'm seeing new faces every week. I'm seeing the numbers go up in number of views on these videos. It is so inspiring. Everyone's reaching out to me, giving me really great feedback. It's just motivating me to keep doing this. It's awesome to know that I'm putting something out there that people are finding value in, and I want to keep it going, and the way to keep that going is to grow it, and I want to grow it organically, and the way to do that is if you just take a couple seconds and hit that share button. If you want to do it after the interview, that's fine too. I know people are kind of conservative about what they want to put on their Facebook profiles. I'm the exact same way. Everything has to go through me first. I don't want people posting willy-nilly. What I can promise you is I'm not going to talk about politics or religion or diet or anything controversial on these discussions. I think you are safe and controversy-free. But if you want to wait, I totally understand, as long as you just hit that share button. Comment. Please like and comment, even if it's just to say hi. I see Bradley Fuster. What's up, man? Diana Morgan, my wife, she's commenting. How's it going? Everyone just comment and say what's up, say hi. If you have a comment or question at any time during this discussion in this panel, please put it in there. Your input is valuable. We've had some wonderful conversations based on listener input and questions. So if you have any questions for this panel at any time, put it in there. We will definitely get to it at some point during the show. Thank you. Like, comment, share. So a lot of my interviews have been centered around auditions. We've talked about how to prepare for auditions, how to practice for auditions, what it's like to go through each round of an audition, from prelims to semis to finals to super finals to the orchestra round to winning a job. We have all of those unique perspectives from percussionists, and now I want to take it to the other side of the screen. I want to know what the committee is thinking. Their input is arguably much more valuable than a percussionist. There's no shortage of opinions from percussionists about how an excerpt should be played. You go on any percussion forum and someone asks a question about what sticks to use or a certain excerpt, and there will be a million responses immediately. People saying, well, it has to be this way. Well, traditionally it's this way. Well, this way we play our rough this wide and we play it this short. And they're dogmatic about it. People get in arguments. They dig their heels in. That's just noise. Like, there's value in a percussionist's opinion, but there's more value in someone who doesn't play percussion, because percussionists only make up a quarter of your audition panel. Everyone else plays another instrument, and their total experience with percussion might just be, oh, that is the section that plays behind me. Sometimes it sounds good. Sometimes it sounds weird. Sometimes I don't like how it sounds. And that's how they're going in, and it's a completely new experience for them. But those are the people you need to impress. They're just using their musical instincts to decide if you're the best fit for their orchestra or not. So that is why I have my panel on today. All three of the panelists today have sat on percussion and timpani auditions and have hired someone for a major orchestra. I have Dan Smith, who is the associate principal double bass of the San Francisco Symphony. He was recently on the panel that hired Bryce Leafman for their assistant timpanist and section percussion job. Huge job and a big responsibility for a committee, and it's fresh in his mind. It was just a couple months ago that they hired him, so I'm sure Dan has a lot of information. It's fresh in his head. Maybe he even has some of his notes that he took. I don't know. I should have maybe asked him beforehand. I don't want to put him on the spot, but he's a smart guy. I know he's going to figure it out. I also have Elise Henry, who is the second flutist in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. She was on the committee in 2016 that hired Matt Howard for the principal percussion audition. That audition, that was the first opening in percussion for the principal percussionist in 33 years in that orchestra. They were looking for a complete change of guard. They wanted to hire a complete rock star, and they found one in Matt Howard. How did they do it? Elise is going to tell you in her own words. And then I also have Nir Kabaretti. Nir is the music director of the Santa Barbara Symphony and the Southwest Florida Symphony, among others in Europe, but I want to kind of stick to American auditions. He was on my committee when I won principal percussion in Santa Barbara Symphony in 2008, and then I know that Southwest Symphony had a principal percussion audition a few years ago, which he was obviously on the committee for. And, you know, whose opinion is more important than the music director? He's your boss. He's going to hire you, and you definitely want him to think highly of you so you can keep your job and keep playing music. So we're attacking this from all different angles. Very excited to get this started. It is my absolute pleasure to bring you Dan Smith, Elise Henry, and Nir Kabaretti. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being on the show. Yeah, man. Of course. There we go. How's everyone doing?
Wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Eddie, for this initiative.
Of course, of course. So, I guess I'll get started right away. I think all of you, we discussed briefly that for all of you, this was your first time sitting on a committee for percussionists. So, I mean, it's a pretty crazy experience. So I want to know what your expectations were going in, kind of what you knew going in about percussion, and if you did kind of any background research before you went. And I guess we'll start with Dan. That was the most recent audition. So Dan, why don't you start us off?
Thanks again, Eddie, for having me on here, trusting my opinion. It was a very enlightening experience, definitely. I can't say that I did a lot of prep except for look at the list beforehand and try to recall what my role is. And since our audition was for section percussion and assistant principal timpani, I think where I felt the most comfort in how I could offer some beneficial opinion was that as a bass player, we're constantly looking to the timpanist for cues, but also just for tone of particularly our pizzicato, like plucking strings. We try to get a very similar tone to the timpani and match up in a lot of ways. So that was where I had the most hope, but granted, I definitely felt overwhelmed because there's so many different instruments, different things that might sound great in an audition, and then in the section, the only thing I can think of is if they maybe sound too loud or bangy. I know that's like maybe a trigger word for some percussionists, and I don't mean it in a bad sense, but I don't know, I just felt nervous. But what was helpful was Ed Steffen, our principal timpanist, and Jake Nisley, our principal percussionist. They played some excerpts for us beforehand and gave us a sense of what they're looking for, some pitfalls in specific excerpts, tendencies of people that just of a quality of a musician they know will not fit in our orchestra. So that was helpful to have that kind of a feeling beforehand.
Yeah, so they gave you kind of a primer, so you weren't completely blind going in.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like half your musical instincts, half just what the percussionist preferred. So there was a bit of influence by the percussion section in your perception of what was good and what wasn't.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good to know. It's very good to know. Elise, how about you?
Kind of similar. Well, my first kind of expectation for the audition happened when before the audition even started, when we were kind of talking about the logistics of everything. I was on the auditions and renewals committee. So not only was I on the panel for the audition, but I was on the core committee that headed all of the auditions for the Los Angeles Philharmonic at the time. So we got an email one day saying we might need to rethink the timing for each person on stage, because while in a normal, every other audition, people play one instrument. They come in, they come off. Often it's an easy instrument to carry. They have their own instrument. The percussion audition was so different in every way. I mean, they were playing the orchestra's instruments often, for many of them. I believe they brought their own, a couple of their own instruments. But it was just the logistics and the way that everyone had to move across the stage and play each instrument was so specific to the audition that it's something that I hadn't thought about until it came up right beforehand. So going into it, I was expecting each person to take longer and for it to be, in my mind, even more of a performance, because you're jumping from one instrument to the next, and so that was different too, to my ear, getting used to all of the different instruments and what qualities I was listening for in each one was an experience. I didn't prepare it all beforehand, but like all of our auditions, the section members who are on the panel will go through and kind of say, what they're looking for, like Dan said, like what are the pitfalls, what's hard about it, what are they listening for, what do they expect, and so that's kind of what gets in our ear and what we start listening for as well. And I think it kind of progresses from there. So the first round, I was prepared to listen for really basic things, rhythm, pitch in certain instruments, musicality, and then as I got an idea of what I was listening for, it got more and more specific, and it got easier as the rounds progressed.
Yeah, I imagine that's true. I'm going to do a follow-up question for all of you after that, but I want to hear a music director's perspective. I know this was a while ago. This is 12 years ago that my audition was, but if you can think back to then and to the more recent one in Florida.
Right, and actually I just had recent one even in Israel with my orchestra. So every few years there is a percussion audition, and I have to say, sitting on all instruments auditions, right? By now I've been in, of course, many more violin auditions and viola and cello, but double bass and pretty much every instrument. By far the most difficult for me as a music director is the percussion audition. First of all, is the wide range of instruments, as Elise said correctly. And also, each instrument is so different. I mean, somebody can rock the xylophone, and then you come to a very short passage in the triangle or in the cymbals. And I think, before I've had you in the audition, I've already conducted a few years, right? And I thought I knew a lot about percussion, but then came this audition. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's this entire world that I didn't know as deep as I should, maybe. And I think it's the fascinating part is, of course, all of a sudden, every audition you look for this for basic things, but you want to make sure that is covered, right? It's timing, it's style, pitch in instrument, and that. But in the percussion, because it's so wide range, it makes things a little bit more complicated, and you need extra time to get into it. But it is fascinating, and I think also there's something else about percussion, which for me, as a conductor, in a way, I see the timpani certainly, but also the percussionist a little bit as a co-pilot. So Dan said very right, in a pits or things like that. You want to make sure more that the double bass is looking at the conductor hand, that they actually listen and sort of anticipate the timpanist feel. So when you have a timpanist or a percussionist, it's very important for me also to see the movement and to feel that we are actually on the same pace of breathing. So when it's behind curtain, makes it even more challenging. So I think it's a very complicated process, and I've actually watched two times ago when Brian won this audition in San Francisco. I learned even more things that I thought I already knew, and so it's a fascinating process to be part of it.
Right. So what I'm hearing from all three of you is, like, even though Dan had a primer, Elise kind of had a little bit of primer but didn't study going in. This was a difficult concept. There's so many different instruments. Would you say that, like, the first 3 to 5 candidates are at kind of a disadvantage then when you hear them that day, because you kind of don't really know what's going on yet?
I think that's pretty much good for every audition, that maybe the first couple or 3, you're sort of adjusting yourself to the sound, the possibilities, because when you play in an orchestra, in any room, any given room, and you hear the double bass play in a section, and then all of a sudden you hear just one person, there's no way that the dynamic will match. It's not the same sound that I hear from a double bass in the section. It's an individual. So you have to understand, wait a second, this person is now playing for me in audition. That's not necessarily the sound that he will play when he has 4 or 6 more colleagues to play with. So I think there's a little bit of adjusting curve that every audition almost happens. However, I have to say that if somebody rocks and you hear that, I mean, we have 2 examples that I've been in their auditions with Dan as well. Doesn't matter where you are, you see somebody that is really credible and you will advance them. So yes, there is a learning process, and probably the first 3 people, you adjust the ear to the space, to the sound, to the pieces, especially for a percussion, there's so many different pieces. It's not like in a violin that pretty much we know they play first round a concerto by Mozart or something like that we all know. There are all kinds of pieces that I don't think I know all of them. So most of the rep but there are some esoteric pieces that I've never heard before.
Yeah, and especially if it's like an unpitched instrument, it's very out of context. They're all just like playing these random rhythms all of a sudden. So, that's very. So Elise and Dan, if you can remember back to the audition, do you remember if anyone advanced like in the first? And I guess in the first group, like, do you remember how many you advanced, or if you were just kind of confused? No, nobody.
I wish I kept my notes. I mean, at this point, it's been years.
Yeah, it's been 4 years. I know.
So I don't remember. But I would say that if anything, I'm a little more lenient for the first couple. And it's true that you are getting an ear for it, and you're just getting used to what you're about to hear for the rest of the audition. But I tend to be a little more forgiving because I'm not quite sure. And then as it progresses, I find myself becoming more strict about what I want to hear and how I want to hear it. And then when it doesn't happen, it's easier for me to dismiss than right at the beginning when I'm all ears and I'm really trying to search for what I'm listening for still. So I wouldn't say it's a disadvantage necessarily, and it's true that when you hear a good player, they're a good player regardless of where they are in the lineup. And often there are people advanced from, in any audition, I find that there are often people advanced from the first couple of rounds, and it's definitely not a huge disadvantage in my mind.
Right.
Okay. Dan,
I'd agree with that. I also am calibrating as the first person I'm hearing now. I'm like, okay, this is the tone, whatever. I'm seeing the piece potentially for the first time, following along with them. Like I want to clap. Oh, bravo, that sounded wonderful. And then I start listening on. I'm like, oh, I really like this dynamic range a lot more than the other person. So I'll try to assign some sort of numbering system to give me some idea. And typically it's based off of what I'm just reading. Like especially if it's out of a, starting in a prelim round, some of the main things you're trying to cut is not the fine tuning detail as of yet. You're looking for the main troublesome things like pitch, rhythm, groove even. And so when those things are established, and honestly from the last audition I was on, that we had, the percussion portion of this audition, the candidates were phenomenal in my opinion, and I felt like I was too lenient. And then for the percussion side of things, the people who stood out, which this is just a common theme I see. I've sat on a cello committee, audition committee in Santa Barbara, and just for my own students, when I listen to my own recordings, I feel like the common theme of the people who stand out, assuming that the basic essentials and fundamentals are taken care of, pitch, rhythm, all those things, is the dynamic range. Like whoever has the largest dynamic range is always the one that ends up moving me or the panel in some way and just makes them stand out in some regard. So I almost wonder, I kind of think this for any candidate, you're allowed to play a few notes on stage before you start your round, and kind of to get a feel, although maybe that changes for orchestra, I'm not sure. I know for us, we're allowed to, and maybe for the first candidate, I would especially do so, because I feel like what I'm going to remember them as above everything is their dynamic range, and which just kind of gives to me the sense of comfortability. You are really sure of your instrument. What should I say? You have like a mastery of this hall and the instrument, and you know to what extremes you can go. And the people in my mind that get cut, especially when, for us, and in my opinion, the percussion side of this audition was quite phenomenal. The ones who really stood out were the ones who had these incredible, delicate, crisp pianos, and you could hear the tone beautifully, and then the crescendos, decrescendos all made sense. And and then we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but there was the timpani side of my audition I listened to that was the standout part of what made and cut other people.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to what you were talking about when you said like playing a few notes to warm up. That is something, at least in my mind, that like percussionists just don't ever really think to do. And I know that other instrumentalists do that for sure. Like harps will retune, or clarinets will, if they're switching whatever, they'll like play a few notes to do it. But it seems to be kind of like a faux pas in the percussion world. But you, as the non-percussionist on a committee, would you all be kind of in agreement that you wouldn't mind if someone just kind of tested something out in the hall really quick, like played like a rim shot, but just kind of lightly tapped the snare drum or something like that? That's okay in your opinion?
Of course.
Yeah. That's very good to know.
I totally agree. I think, and I'm also, I like to refer to Dan about the dynamic range. Sitting in so many different auditions with a lot of esteemed colleagues and people I have a lot of respect for. And very often what I hear, and that's really in different continents, is, oh my gosh, that's too loud. Everybody's playing too loud. And I think sometimes we are sort of picking on these people. Oh, they are just loud people. I think we have to a little bit to understand that the circumstances are, it's not exactly, we don't expect somebody to play, and I'm not talking about percussion, but any instrument. When you play alone without an orchestra, I want to see you. I want to see your personality. So I don't mind if it goes maybe a little bit over what this phrase normally would be in a context of a symphony. So, and I think that's something that, we said, yes, all the basic things have to come, but there's always one, and that's where it really touches you when you see, okay, I see a musician there. I see somebody. I see a personality that convinced me. And you know what? It might not be stylistically right. It might be, I might have a different opinion about something, but it was something interesting. It was something that, oh my God, this person has something to offer. And I take for granted that if you arrive to a professional audition, you've been on a long way in studying so that you will be able to adapt a conductor indication, or probably more important in the section context, that your principal indication, right? If you're playing a section of the violin or the, I'm expecting any musician that will be able to adapt if the concertmaster or the section leader tell them something, or conductor. So even they offer something which might be a little bit different, I say that should not be against the candidate.
Okay, so on that topic, like behind a screen, so you're talking about the importance of basically personality, emotional character in their playing, but you can't see them. So in your opinion, how does that come across? How do you experience someone who is playing with lots of emotional character when they're playing? We'll just stick to snare drum. We'll do like a non-pitch instrument. When someone plays a snare drum excerpt and it makes you feel something, what is that feeling? And maybe I want to get Elise's opinion, because this was a principal percussion audition for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. You needed someone who is a true musician. So I guess maybe you can think back to the final round when Matt played snare drum. Like how did his snare drum stand out with the other really qualified candidates? Like what came across to you?
I think to me, it was a combination of, again, the dynamics, because you can express a lot, especially on an unpitched instrument, with the various dynamics, and also the clarity of articulation. And you can, in particularly really passages with very fast articulation and notes, you could hear the clarity was there in everything. So not only could you hear precisely and sharply everything that was dictated on the page, but it was brought to life by the dynamics.
Okay.
Yeah, so those dynamics are huge.
And
sure.
Nir, how about you for the two percussion auditions?
You're right. I mean, pretty much in every percussion audition, the snare drum part would, very often it will be the tremolo in the Rimsky-Korsakov, right? The Capriccio Espagnol. And the first time I said, like, what's that? I mean, like, what for? Right? But if you listen carefully, you actually can say, is this musician behind the snare? Does he really anticipate what's going on? Does he really follow the cadenza that the brass is doing? And things like that. And once you are in it, and you will feel it. You will feel that there's a different sound. And I know it's very minimal, but this nuance between really beautiful sound or something, well, it sounds like somebody is doing tremolo.
Right.
You feel that. And you feel the crescendo. You feel that there is an intensity there. And honestly, that's one of the things, take the Rimsky-Korsakov. Conductor is totally unimportant for that section, for the side drum. You really rely on a musician that could give you this. Yes, you could talk in the rehearsal. I would like you to maybe make the crescendo a little bit more here, a little bit there, but you are totally in the hand of the percussion there.
Right.
So I think it was fascinating for the first time. And for example, bolero, right? I mean, everybody would expect to hear, a consistent, solid person. But, once you have it in your heart, I try to say, does this person that play now understand that the entire orchestra sit on his two very small movements? And that gets out. I do feel that, especially we have now a flute player here. That's basically if that is right, I don't think any flute player need to follow the conductor at the beginning of the bolero or something like that. That's really a feeling between musicians. And I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if it's possible to explain it, but you feel it. Where you feel, I have this kind of bass that I feel comfortable to play one of the most erotic, phrases on just a very simple rhythm. And
so
that's
they're just kind of making you feel an emotion, like they're kind of imposing an emotion on you that you are not maybe expecting to feel, but you feel when they're playing. Like maybe you can hear the orchestra behind them, or even though they're playing the snare drum, you can hear the orchestra when they play.
You should be able to hear the orchestra, absolutely. And, the feeling that's what carries it, and that gives the background to the entire group to feel comfortable and make music on. So I know it's kind of hard because it's very abstract, but once you hear it right and you hear the procession that goes through there, it's a big difference.
Right.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think the way that also hearing that explanation, the way that I gauge musicality is by putting myself in performance, and how would I expect to hear that as it fits with my part, as it fits with the orchestra. Can I hear the orchestra in it and behind it? And that says a lot. You can really tell if the person knows, they know the context of the piece.
It's kind of like an intangible magic that they're performing. Dan, so I know in the San Francisco audition, a lot of people were getting cut off after the first snare drum excerpt, which was the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra. For those of you who don't know, it's a snare drum solo, but there's no snares, and it's a very simple rhythm, and it just has to groove really hard, but it's so basic, and a lot of people were getting cut off right after that excerpt. So maybe if you could speak to that, like what did you hear that caused you to either advance someone or to cut them off at that point?
That might be a loaded question for myself. One,
That's
I apologize,
fine.
I don't have my notes, but
that's okay.
Why it's loaded is because, to my recollection, we always started with a timpani round and did a few timpani excerpts.
Yeah, there are 3 timpani, like it was vibraphone solo, 3 timpani excerpts, then Bartók.
So what I believe happened with some candidates was it was almost like if we often we made a decision after hearing the timpani round, the timpani portion, and it was sometimes a semi-mercy rule, I would say, of like we want to hear through, because I mean for our position it's section percussion assistant principal timpani, but you're only going to be playing timpani maybe 20% of the time, I would say. You're most of your time is spent in the percussion section. However, we are looking for a very specific timpanist, and so it became obvious, I would say, that in the timpani round this wasn't going to be a good fit, but we still wanted to hear a few percussion excerpts. So I would that could be that's what I remember happening most of the time, because I do remember percussionists standing out. I mean, all the candidates, no one in the percussion portion of these, to my ear, sounded unprepared or unmusical. Like, it was incredibly impressive. And I frequently, after we would take breaks from rounds, I would ask Ed and Jake, like, if I'm on the right calibration of what I should be listening to or not, because like it usually was timpani. I'm not sure I like this sound yet, but then the percussion section of what they're playing is incredibly impressive and musical, and it was a very challenging growing experience for myself, and I think a lot of the committee, because we had to cut people who were highly qualified for specific things, but then particularly for the timpani sound, like it was something else that we were looking for.
Right. Yeah, I definitely want to get on a timpani at some point, because it's just its own little beast. But we'll get to that soon. There's a couple questions from some of the viewers. We have Brandon Shantz. He says, were the votes to advance candidates weighed in any way? Percussionist, timpanist votes count for more than the other instrumentalists, and do you feel a sense of responsibility to study all the rep before sitting on the panel for various auditions? So it's 3 questions. Let's see, we'll start with Nir. Like, I know in the final round, the music director kind of does have more votes than everyone else, but what was it like in the preliminary rounds? Was your vote still weighted?
Well, what we normally do, and I like it, it's like the first round is sort of every jury member just write down the number or whatever we says, and then we just see who got the majority votes, etc. So there's not much discussion, and I think we start to talk about the candidates from the semifinal and on. So no, I mean, there was very, very few cases in my entire 20 years of hearing auditions where really there was like the tie, and I said, okay, I would like that. It's normally quite clear cut. So it's rather everybody likes somebody says, well, that really rocks. So most of the time I don't think a music director has to do that. I think also it's not good, because if you feel that there's no consensus on someone, that doesn't set the bar for the probation, etc. So normally, really, and that's very often the case, we have really a good consensus about the candidates. Let's say in the first round, where we have maybe sort of a tie, then yes, I have a little bit more opportunity to say, so I would rather prefer that. However, and I like what Elise says, in the first round, sometimes I am more forgivable, because, forgiving, because I said, maybe I was not hearing the right thing. Let's give another chance. I mean, that's possible, also depend on the amount of candidates. I mean, it's really hard to do it when you have, 100 clarinet players, but depends on the amount of people. I think, I really think it's an equal feeling between the colleagues. It's not like one.
And did you study the percussion rep at all before going in, or?
Yeah, well, a lot of the music, of course, I knew I conducted before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just wanted to say one thing about the timpani. For me, timpani is the really one thing that I need to hear with an orchestra. Mm-hmm. I feel very uncomfortable to hire a timpanist without hearing him with an orchestra.
It's very strange out of context. Yeah.
Exactly, and I remember in my assistant conducting time about 20 years ago, I was working with Zubin Mehta, and they had auditioned for the timpani player who played there for years, played with Giulini and Carlos Kleiber and Karajan and everyone. And the time came, and he is retiring. And at the audition, Maestro asked me to start Brahms' First Symphony, and I went to see from the back. And then he did the Rite of Spring with them, etc. And I think after that we had some discussions about, because I had different feelings, and we discussed it. And one of the most interesting things that I've heard from Maestro Mehta at that time, he said, I really prefer this candidate because I could read him. I could understand that we are working together and we are feeling the music in the same way. And I think it's very important for percussionists that it's also visible. It's not only the sound that you make, guys. It's really the fact that when I see you, I feel your hands, the entire thing. So we are probably the extreme sides of the stage. And so also the body language makes a big impact certainly between the timpani and the conductor.
Okay. Awesome. That's very, very useful. Yeah, I totally agree. Like hearing just myself from being on the other side of a panel, listening to timpani, even as a percussionist and a timpanist, it is so bizarre to hear timpani out of the context of the orchestra. It's just such a strange experience. So I totally agree. There always should be an orchestra around when you're hiring a timpanist, because you just have to hear what they sound like. Because someone could sound great in an audition, it might be something you really like, but then you get into the orchestra and you can't hear them, or like they're playing too light and they're unable to adjust, or any number of things. So yeah, but to that other question, Elise and Dan, were the votes weighted in any way besides the music director? Did the percussionists have more weight in the preliminary rounds in your auditions?
Our votes are not weighted for any audition in our orchestra, and our music director isn't present until the final round.
Right.
So he's not hearing any of the prelims or semis. The way that our system works is that the candidate has to get a majority of the panel in order to advance to the next round. So depending on however many people are on the panel, they have to have more than 50% of the vote. And everyone is weighted equally. There's also no discussion until the finals. So it's just what everyone's opinion, they vote yes or no. And then based on that, the candidates advanced or not. If they're one vote short of advancing, then we will have a revote. And everyone is allowed to change their opinion, yes or no.
Okay.
I always tend to, if I was questioning, or of course if I really like them, but if I was on the fence, I tend to vote yes, because it seems that there's enough people who are interested and I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, So, it's all equal until the finals. And then I would say in most auditions, weight is given to the members of the section or the people who are closest to that position, because as a flutist, it was very hard for me in the discussions, because I had to speak first. Whenever we actually do talk in the finals, we start with the instrument always, no matter what audition is, the instrument furthest away. So for me, Matt's audition, that was unfortunately me, which is to start a discussion like that, you know, because you know the least amount going into it. So I definitely weigh the percussionists and the bassists and the people that sit closer. I weigh their opinion very strongly in the later rounds with my own. But in the first couple, it's just whatever you think, and everyone's vote is equal.
Okay, so in the LA Phil, they have to get 50% or more, and there's another question from Mike Tatrault, who is curious if the committees were generally in agreement or disagreement regarding who advances and who doesn't, and if you encountered any surprises. So was there a lot of that re-voting going on in Matt's audition?
No, it's for every audition, it's totally different because there's different panelists and there's different candidates and different instruments. I'd say, I don't know, it's really very random. I don't think there was a lot of on the fence, but it definitely does happen, and it goes both ways. You know, sometimes it's a yes, we'll advance this person, and sometimes it's no, and it's really very random. I wouldn't say for one audition or another it happens more or less. And again, I can't recall specifically for Matt's.
Right. Dan, how about you? I'm sorry, Elise, sorry to cut you off.
Sorry, I didn't know from personal experience that I would tend to want to advance someone, but I can't speak for the other panelists.
Right.
How about you, Dan? What was that like in San Francisco?
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement. Our voting process is almost identical to LA Phil's, and the music director comes in the final round, and everyone gets one vote. And that it comes into specifics, like when you have, they call them post-audition activities, like having a round with the orchestra, which we did with our timpani candidates. I would, to a couple of those questions that came up, I would also agree that I tend to give the benefit of the doubt because, one, I kind of just doubt my own opinion a little bit, but then as the process goes along, I start finding that my opinion is quite similar to most of the panel. There's usually not a huge discrepancy between opinions. It usually favors one side, as in it's pretty obvious and clear, which I also kind of wanted to point out that other question of, do you think that the committee should be prepared beforehand, as in knowing all the excerpts? I mean, on one practical sense, it's impossible for all of us to study and know these excerpts for this specific instrument, that's outside of our own expertise, to know it to that degree. Granted, we usually know the pieces and the context of it, but I would say that knowing that with each round, the votes tend to be quite, I wouldn't say unanimous, but they're the majority is thinking and feeling kind of the same way. And that's why discussion is more important towards the very end, because you're just getting all this fine-tuning, nitty-gritty, what's the certain thing that sets them apart. And you start to learn through the process and through each round, like, oh, this is a common theme here, or a pitfall here, again, that most people are doing. And then the person who doesn't go through that kind of stands out. And then by the very end, it's really the one who is the most musical, like the largest range. And that just seems to, we all have different expertise, but we all have a common sense and goal of musicianship. And when you, as was stated earlier, like when you can sense by something they're doing that on paper might look boring or monotonous, like you can sense that they feel, and they're just kind of guiding you along this pathway in terms of a boring rhythm, but you trust them. You don't get lost. You can feel the momentum where it's leading to. You can sense something else is happening. And that seems to be a unanimous thing picked up amongst the committee. We all have different instruments, but we all sense that when someone really has a true sense of musicianship.
You just you feel comfortable listening to them. That's what I think every instrumentalist gets told this, but it's I don't want to feel uncomfortable when I listen to you. So, and I think that's doubly true for percussion, because I feel like you can easily be uncomfortable listening to percussion, and that really does have an effect on someone when someone comes in and they're playing something like a snare drum or a tambourine, and your reaction instead of this is just wow, that was really great. So yeah, no, that's That's awesome to hear. It's, affirming for me at least. What about the solo? So, I know in San Francisco there was a vibraphone solo in the first round. Is that kind of like, does that kind of help calibrate you to how like the musicality of the person before they played anything percussive? What kind of value was the solo for you when you're trying to determine someone's musicianship?
Oh yeah, I would say there were several people that had incredible solos that I all of a sudden felt biased towards them, and I just wanted them to be the best. And then sometimes it turned out like we'd all agreed to advance them, and some other people they had such an exquisite solo, and it was talked about by almost everyone on the committee. And yet there's these other things like, well, the rhythm was off here, they didn't do this dynamic, but their solo was so good. Like you want them to, it is a great I don't know, it's a great way to start something, because if it's boring or non-musical, it does set the tone. You're like, okay, well, I don't know if I really want to listen through this whole thing. And then maybe they check the boxes, and I would say in the prelims, if there aren't any crazy problems, but it didn't totally move you, maybe we'd still pass you. But the one who has just this incredible solo, I end up favoring them and wanting them to do the best, until they might point out other things that would say, well, this just obviously wouldn't work in a section or with orchestra. So
it had a pretty big impact on you then.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Elise, how about you? I know there was the Bach Gigue from the Lute Suite on marimba.
I couldn't agree more. For me, especially as a wind player, to be able to sculpt phrases and play really musically and beautifully on an instrument, on a keyboard, is so impressive to me, and something that is just non-negotiable and something that I was really looking for, and it definitely set the tone for the rest of the audition. Oh yeah, if I loved their solo, I was rooting for them already, and regardless, I would felt myself being more forgiving and more lenient on the other things, and really wanting them to do well. I can't say enough about the first impression, especially if it's one that's a solo, like a very soloistic excerpt of something.
It's kind of like the easiest way for you to relate to them as another musician.
Definitely.
Was through the solo. Nir, how about you? Was there... Oh, just really quickly, I know, Elise, you have to go. Can you stick around for one more question, Elise?
Of course.
Great. Nir, what about you in terms of a solo for percussion?
Definitely, it's not, it's the first impression, normally the solo piece in the audition, and there is something enchanting. If a musician makes it to your heart with the first piece, it certainly gives a bonus. I have to say, though, that very often the person that I like most in the solo part did not actually get the audition, because they might be very good. And that's not about percussion. That's in general. You would hear somebody that makes an incredible Mendelssohn or Tchaikovsky concerto, whatever, and then you go to the excerpts and you see that this person does not really know the excerpt to start with, or couldn't care less to prepare them the right way that they should have been doing. So, I think a good solo part certainly opened the door, and you look at this person maybe in a different eyes, because of, oh my gosh, this person can actually play all this. But the decision will be made based on the excerpts.
Okay. So one more question before Elise takes off here, and then once Elise leaves, if Nir and Dan, if you guys have a couple minutes to talk about timpani, that would be wonderful. Can you stick around for a question after?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So let's skip all the way to the super finals. You've gone prelims, semis, finals. Now you've maybe taken the screen down and you're in the super finals. Everyone is incredibly qualified. Everyone is really good. They're sounding awesome. They've gotten that far. How did you choose? Dan, in your case, how did you choose Bryce? Elise, how did you choose Matt? And Nir, how did the committee decide on me and the other guy in Florida? I don't know his name, unfortunately, but when you had the audition in Florida, I would love, let's start with Dan on that one. Yeah,
so we had finals. I think there's 6 candidates in the finals. we limited it down to 2, had the super finals. The screen comes down in the super finals, and Esa-Pekka was there, and he conducted a few portions, and they did a full percussion round with the candidates playing timpani, like for Copeland 3, or they tried to do some full percussion section rounds. And we did not decide in the super finals. There were great qualities from both of our super finalists, and it really came down to consensus of we need to hear them in context with orchestra. And so a few weeks later, we had both of them back. After an orchestra rehearsal, we did some maybe it was only, I think we did only timpani rounds for the 2 of them, and then that he met afterwards and then made the decision.
Okay. And how did you just, so you got down to 2 people hearing him in the orchestra with Esa-Pekka. How did you pick Bryce? What was the deciding factor for Bryce?
I would say that, and honestly, man, I feel bad when I listen to people. I want everyone to win because it's like, I know how much time and effort you put into this, and this is a brand new hall. You've never, most of you haven't even played in here before. You haven't had time to work on stuff. And so I remember the main distinction, one of the main distinctions was Bryce was very, I would say, on the beat with Esa-Pekka, to the point that the orchestra and the timpani were just quite together, where to the point of in a boomy hall and you're in the back, I think a timpanist, I would assume, would need to be kind of on the front end of the beat so it doesn't sound late to everyone else.
Yeah,
and that's
need to kind of lead in those types of acoustics.
Yeah, and that honestly was one of the main things. The other candidate, I remember, it had that sensation and feeling of pulling back, which is something bass players just tend to do. We tend to be on the backbeat. We tend to kind of chill out, and that affects everyone else, and it makes the groove slide back, and you just always hear the music director saying, bass is late. Like, maybe we're playing with everyone, but it still sounds late because you need to hear that percussive front end to it, kind of leading and helping it move forward. And very similar with the timpani, and I think that kind of takes time maybe to be adjusted to a hall, but that was one of the main things because they both had such great qualities. And I'd also say, which we'll talk about later with timpani playing, that Bryce's playing was just, again, had this great quality and just like a fatness, a presence to it, rather than, it didn't sound like just another percussion instrument. It sounded like how I want my bass playing to sound like, with these pizzas. I don't want to hear I want to hear a boom and some sustenance to it. And so those were 2 things that really stood out for me.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll definitely plant a flag in that and get back to timpani. Elise, this is the LA Phil principal percussion. I know you guys invited people to the super finals. You had principal percussionists from other big orchestras. Matt was the youngest candidate there. He was the only candidate who had gone from the prelims all the way through to the finals. How did you decide on him?
Oh man, Dan, your explanations were like so precise, and so I wish that I could remember more of the details of this audition.
Well, his was just like 2 months ago, so it better be fresh.
That's unfair.
Like, more specific pointers. Man, all I can say is that I think he had just had the total package. Like, it was, his rhythm was really on, the clarity of all the articulations, particularly in all of the snare and the really finite little tiny movements were just all there, and the clarity was there. The solo was musical. So not only did he captivate us with the solo, but then the excerpts were there to back it up and to show it. The triangle, I just remember throughout the whole process, like the triangle excerpts being so telling, and I would never have guessed that before the audition. It was just crazy. So that was there. It was, all of the dynamics, all of the control, and it was the overall control and clarity of every single instrument. So it just all came together, and it happened to be that we all agreed. I mean, we all felt similarly, and we were able to hire him through that audition. It's not the case with every audition, but with that one definitely, we were able to hire him just through the audition.
All right, yeah, musical triangle playing. It's not something you ever think about.
Yeah, super crazy.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Well, Elise, I know you got to go, so I'll say bye to you. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you very soon after this is all over.
Welcome. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I'll see you
Bye,
soon.
guys.
Bye.
Bye, Elise.
So, Nir, your turn. If what made you decide? And if you could move a little bit to your right so that you're in the frame. There you are. Mm-hmm. Okay. Perfect.
I think, as Elise mentioned, it is a package that comes together, and it's really good for every musician. Every musician has things, but then you look of something of a package. But in the percussion is really a big package because you have so many different instruments. And I have to say, somebody, I was very impressed with the glockenspiel, and then maybe I don't know the tambourine was not. I thought maybe could be a little bit better. But if you look at the entire thing, it's pretty clear when it comes to the final. I want this person. I'm for this person, and very very often, and that was the Santa Barbara, but also the two cases. I had two auditions in Florida. We're talking about very young musicians, and so they're very fresh, and you see there's a huge potential. And he said, okay, I believe in this person, and it's clear. I cannot say it was like this. But what I would like to say that I think it's so important to have a percussionist next to you, to the committee, for all of us who do not play percussion, because there are a lot of things that this person played the bolero on that part of the snare or used this melody. So there are a lot of information that help us to evaluate why, for example, the sound here was this or that. So I think we all somehow rely on our colleagues, but when it comes to the final, it's pretty clear who is going to win.
Okay, very interesting. So it's almost, I wouldn't say predetermined, but going into the finals, you have a good idea of who's going to get it. But you're just giving everyone a chance because they're all very good, and maybe someone will convince you. Who knows?
Right. There is also a little bit of a difference, between the semifinal and the final because of you take maybe the screen up, and it also depends on the rap, and maybe there's also a process, and I don't know, you would know better than me. What's the process that goes in the candidates filling between the different rounds? Maybe the last round you are more free, or I don't know. But sometimes you see, oh my gosh, this candidate who was, whatever number that in the semifinal, I did not expect such a great final. So there is that as well. One thing about audition that is so clear, there is no parallel pattern. I think every audition is different. Every instrument is different. But as I said, when you come to the last round and you see in front of you whoever, 5 people or something like that, you do know. I think there is a good consensus between, and then we can talk. And sometimes a colleague will say, "But you look in this particular piece, it did this and that." Then we all discuss it and say, and sometimes we do that as well. Said, "Let's hear them again." Maybe there are 2 people that are coming very close and said, "We undecided because we thought this," so we bring them again and exactly targeting what our concerns, and then it's clear.
I actually remember that in my audition, you had me play La Mer again. Like at the very end, you had me go back and play La Mer one more time. I remember that.
Sorry for that.
That's fine.
For that, but it was...
Hey, I got it. I did it. So I did something right. Okay, great. So there was something you said that I wanted to ask a follow-up question about. Oh, the screen coming down. So the screen coming down now, it's not completely about just how they sound. There is a visual aspect now and a personality aspect, not just musical personality. So when the screen comes down, or Dan, when you're in the orchestra round, how much does that come into play with someone's personality and their appearance?
Yeah, there could be more of a subconscious element to it as well. You kind of are imagining certain things when the screen is up and then comes down, and maybe based on the type of playing you're hearing, you almost expect to see someone, or like you come up with your own image of whoever someone is. To me, though, I'm a very easily distracted individual. So when the screen comes down, I still look down. I don't look up. Like, it's nice to say hi, and I want them to feel as comfortable as possible, because I remember how terrified I was in a final round when the screen came down, or just hyper anxious or excited. And I don't want to say anything weird. I judge every eye movement of the people on the committee. Like, well, they only looked at me for a second. They look down, like they probably think I sound terrible and all this. So I'm probably too excessively like, hey, wow, great to meet you. Okay. And then I'll just look down. But that's also because I'm just, I don't know. I don't want anything. I don't want my mind to wander in some way, because I'm, maybe I'm watching a tick that they have, or that could catch my eye. Or certain facial or muscle movements someone might do that I would judge. Like, if I go to a concert and I'm looking around and listening to music, and I might see certain things that grab my eye, like, I purely want to hear the music. And in the orchestra round, it is that to the nth degree. I mean, now I'm performing with, and I'm trusting what I'm listening to. Certain cues, like for a timpani, like that's a big thing. Now with a timpanist, you're actually watching cues, and you want to feel from their pickups, and you can get some sense that they have an internal rhythm that you now trust. Not the kind of thing that's like a jerky, upbeat muscle motion. They're like, oh geez, where are they going to go? And there they are, So in that regard, like that is absolutely huge. If I look at them, I'm like, I can't follow that. Typically, I would say, though, if everything is standout, that's something you could just address. Like, could you give a more clear upbeat, or maybe in one instead of the and, or...
Right. So it seems like it's kind of coming back down to making you feel comfortable again as a colleague.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's already high tension enough of a job. Yeah. I don't need any more.
Yeah. How about you, Nir? The screen comes down, now their personality's shining through. How much of an impact does that have?
It does have an important impact, and not on the visual or something like that, but more on the feeling. And you said it right. If you see, especially in a string instrument, you're about to hire a section violinist, and you see this person is like all over with the hands or with that could be distracting, and that could be against the candidate, and you take that in consideration. And with percussion, I can easily say, if you feel the movement, and to echo what Dan said, it is important that we all feel comfortable with your movements. I mean, there's a big responsibility there, and again, it's the magic that is created with music, and every conductor has a different body language, and there is a magic that happens. And when you have a percussion with the orchestra, with the conductor, it has to be convincing. And I think when you see a person and you feel their movement, you feel their entire personality, that makes an impact. And again, I don't want to sound like it's a look or there's something there that you feel comfortable about.
Okay, I just want to ask one more question about timpani sound. So we know you got to hear the timpani in the orchestra, but let's say the screen is up, we're in the prelims. I know that timpani sound very strange. Like, sometimes you can't hear pitch, sometimes it just sounds bangy, sometimes it's ringing and you can't hear any articulation. It's such an odd experience to listen to timpani by themselves. What stood out to you in the prelims, listening to a timpanist and saying, that person, I want to advance that person because of their timpani playing? We'll start with Dan, since it's the most fresh.
Oh man, I was nervous, to be honest, to listen, because I felt very out of my comfort zone, and whoever asked the question earlier, like, do you think you should be prepared? The committee should be prepared. Honestly, yes, I do think, and I felt nervous. I'm like, I didn't go through percussion excerpts or timpani excerpts, and so I did feel nervous beforehand, but and another, I think we had maybe 40 preliminary candidates, and so it was like a 10-hour audition day, and it took a few rounds, honestly, until I heard some candidates that really stood out. And what stood out, and that's why I also felt nervous, was because honestly, like in the first round, I believe I just didn't feel comfortable necessarily with the timpani playing, and I wasn't sure what I was to be looking for, and I wanted to play with them. But certain things that really stood out, I would say, some crescendos, especially, like if they're, and I absolutely apologize for my naivete in terminology, anything of what I should be. Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, we're going off what you experience, which is the important thing.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, especially with crescendi, you would really be able to tell, and some people would start going like this, because it could be so aggressive that there's no way I could imagine any person in the orchestra being able to play over that sound. And granted, that's why it gets difficult if there's no one else playing, it's timpani alone. Right. But I would just say the people who stood out that we passed to the next round, who honestly came as a breath of fresh air, were the ones who had a sensitivity to it, and something that you could just have these different senses of different colors within these hits. Another thing too, which I didn't realize was going to be a thing, is just the amount of time of ringing hanging over, and then where they decide to stop the ringing, and how that comes across. If you stop it, so it now sounds, am I judging that sound on the duration of the note that's written, of you controlling the reverb and like fitting in the context with the orchestra, or sometimes where it would just go on and they'd let the hall take over and the ring would just continue, like some of those cases, that was okay, this isn't going to work out. Some of the dynamics where the crescendi became so much, or the piano just again sounded like a mezzo something, which is why the people who could have the pianos that had a color to it, and it was soft and just kind of felt like a little tap or a pat or something, and the crescendo, there were still tone and color to it. Not where most noise. Of the time it would just hit a point, and it would be like a peaking, like if I graphed it out, you just see that red mark, and I don't hear or see it any more color anymore. It's just this effect, and I don't want the effect. And the ones who stood out was when timpani no longer sounded like some percussive something. It was its own instrument, its own section, its own beast to handle. Where you
could hear just like a nice full deep sound where you could really hear the pitch, I guess, and clarity of tone, and these colors, different colors for different styles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Nir, how about you?
Yeah, I think clarity is a key word. It's so important because, it's funny because you have Dan there, and that's the other instrument that where if it's not clear, you can really have hard time to understand where the pitch lies. And so when you have this clarity and you have the direction that needed for the phrasing, and that's something that's not, I don't take for granted. And very often in the timpani you would have, the Britain, the young person's guide. You could really feel, does this person feel all the different drums as one instrument? Do I feel that is a one drum, even plays on different one? Do I really hear the intervals? Do I hear the direction that it goes? And it is possible to hear it. And you'd find this, it's not always the rightest kind of, you want a solid player that play vertically, but it's also a direction that the entire orchestra feels a sort of a wave to go on. And so my take from a timpani, that's exactly what I would like to hear. And I think what's the challenge is as you said before, it's like you come to a hall that you don't really know well, and you are probably, experimenting in the first few seconds. What is actually the ideal sound for me to provide for the jury to get the right impression of the piece, of the style, etc. So I look for that. If this person caught me, oh, that's exactly how I would like to hear it. When we play in a different place, it might sound different, but to get to maximize the conditions you have and bring the music with clarity, with phrasing, that's a magic. And it's very difficult. I have to say, even after so many auditions with the percussion, it's still for one of the most difficult things to be at. It's just so wide range of things to consider.
Yeah. Well, with that, thank you both so much for being here. That was so informative. I hope everyone found the same value I did in getting your opinions as non-percussionists on a panel. What sounds good to you? It seems like it boils down to tone, clarity, and making you feel something, feel comfortable, feel the emotion of the excerpt, feel, not just hearing rhythms that they're playing, like accurate rhythms. You need to feel something more than that in order to feel like that person fits in the orchestra. And that is, more and more clear with every answer you guys gave. So it was great to catch up with you. I can't thank both of you enough for being on here. And I hope... Yeah, you guys are I hope you're doing well up in Santa Barbara and up in San Francisco, and can't wait to make music with you sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Eddie. Wonderful.
Yes,
same.
Of course.
Thanks, Eddie. Nice to see you near.
Hope to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Definitely.
So there we have it. Percussion auditions. We have the committee's opinion now. We can't just go in and play rhythms. We can't just go play accurate rhythms or play all the right notes. That's just not how it works. So make the committee feel something. How do we do that? I think one way is recording yourself, having an intention, and just recording and listening back and trying to make yourself feel the way that you want to feel. Also, play for more non-percussionists than percussionists, just like Bryce said. Like, you really should be playing for other instrumentalists and getting their opinion. And not like, oh, this note was wrong or this rhythm was weird. You want them to feel something. Think of an emotion. Think of an emotional character that you would like for the excerpt, and see if you can make someone feel that exact emotion. I think that is the way you can really prepare for an audition and be a musical percussionist. Okay, next week, I don't have a guest yet. This week was insane. I'm just locked in a practice room, so I'll figure that out, but it'll be another wonderful discussion, and I hope to see you all back here at that time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, next Friday. Until then, be safe, and bye for now.